You said yesterday that Foucault opened a door for you, and it was important at that time that you are not that interested about it anymore. But I want you to tell me, or what door he opened.
No, Foucault wrote about Las Meninas in terms of what he called the classical mode of representation, and it was simply making that point, approaching the picture with that frame that, in a sense, introduced a new discourse. Like most of Foucault, he's usually not original, he's gotten it from somewhere else, and that becomes more and more evident as time goes on. But at that point, it essentially said, let's look at it as a picture, as a piece of representation, as a, he didn't talk about the paint, but let's not think about the puzzle, about the subject. So he got off that. He turned away from the question of the, essentially of the subject, which everybody has always been talking about, and away from the comparison to a photographic image, which also had been very prominent. So those two things, it looks like a photograph, and what's going on, had been what people were talking about. And he said, oh, let's think about it as representation. So that was just broke with the kind of ways people had been writing about it. I mean, people who, professionals, and wrote. So that's what happened.
And that made you start thinking about it, just in terms of...
That's right. I mean, it was from that, that gave me a kick. I mean, very often you get kicks from things which turn out to be irrelevant finally, but when I originally wrote about this in 1982, or 82, I suppose, I owed it to him to give me that kind of kick, to free me of the conventional concerns with the picture.
Interesting, because for some other people, Foucault gave them the reason to start creating all these fictions, all these loops.
I'm not gonna,
games.
If somebody wants to know why Foucault interested me, it was that very specific, narrow thing. I mean, it might be that people felt, I felt narrowly liberated, and other people were broadly liberated. And of course, I would say I just disagree with that. I mean, there has been a huge literature in the last century now, bursting out, trying to interpret, as I said, I mean, a philosopher at Berkeley, a guy who does photography at Chicago, all these people writing about it. And I just think it's boring. It bores me beyond belief, all that. I mean, it might be interesting. Of course, you get interested in something, then you begin to sort of, pick away at it. It becomes, you make a subject. I mean, that's one of the things that writing about pictures does. It produces a subject. It doesn't really help you with the picture, but it becomes a subject unto itself. And figuring out the perspective and all that of Las Meninas became a subject in itself. And since Foucault said it is an example of classical representation, and he defined that, then they all jumped in and tried to tell you what that was. What's the perspective?
Do you know any other painting that has as many interpretations?
I haven't thought about it. I don't know. It has been, I mean, Las Meninas has been it's one of the reasons I like the Spinners. I mean, because I just find it uninteresting and unconvincing.
Do you like it because maybe you can get into, because there are less interpretations?
Sure, exactly. Because I'm suspicious, as I told you, I left literature because I am suspicious of endless interpretations. And the nice thing about a painting is it's there. Of course, that's putting it too simply, but that seemed to me, I replaced a text and all its interpretations with just an object. And then you might say Meninas is treated, I mean, I've never said this before, but as I'm thinking about it here, you could say Meninas gets to be treated like a text. Interpret, 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 interpret. And I just say, no, stop, stop, stop.
So
I'm not going to play the game.
So what you wanted to avoid when you were studying literature It's actually happening.
Happening, that's right, exactly. And Meninas is an example. You know, I can't think, maybe Guernica, I suppose Guernica probably, I mean, Picasso's Guernica has probably been written about a huge amount, many interpretations of that. And there was recently a show in Barcelona, I believe, Barcelona. And again, a big catalog about it and what it meant. So, I mean, that's another picture, but somehow it's obviously, Guernica is a less, that's another Spanish painter, right? A very different Spanish painter, but Guernica, you can't seize it all together. It's harder to look at. It's spread out over a long surface. So it's, you can't get it. You don't think you can get it as quickly as you can get Las Meninas. So therefore, interpreting it seems a more open-ended thing, while Meninas seems, if looked at as a perspective box, closed. So you sort of think you can get it right. But who on earth could get Guernica right? I mean, it's kind of a, you know, it's a piecemeal. It's lots of little pieces he threw together. That's Picasso. It's not this fiercely organized, at least seen one way, room. Painting of a room. Painting as a room.
Yeah, it's obviously, it makes you think that you can understand it, and
but since I'm not interested in interpretation, as I said, coming from literature and saying no, and I'm not interested, I really am not, I don't think about how pictures are interpreted. I mean, I just sort of basically ignore it. I did the same thing when I worked on Rembrandt. I'm really not that interested.
You said something here, okay, I'm going to try to translate it, that that Velázquez is known for his illusionistic magic, but that magic is created more than with the use of painting, but without the paint, something like that. Like instead of painting, what he does it is that he does it without. I don't know if it's not good translation.
Wait a second.
We talked about that. Yeah. We talked about that yesterday.
Yeah, we talked about this yesterday.
We did talk about it. It's the Phantom. That's Ortega.
Oh, that's a Phantom.
Yeah, basically that's what it is. But
are we waiting for something?
To think of.
There was
just wait a sec. We're trying to deal with a dog because dogs are.
A what?
There's somebody brought their dog to work today or
Oh,
something.
for heaven's sake!
I know.
Well, there's a dog in Las Meninas. Maybe we should just talk about it.
Is there anything to talk about the dog? I don't think so.
I don't know. And one of the
Some people
dwarfs
have.
has a foot on it, right? I know. I'm sure people have interpreted the dog too.
Wow. Yes.
Why not? Dogs are faithful. There's a dog in Arnolfini. A little fluffy dog.
Okay, maybe.
The dog's gone?
Actually, he's in the painting.
Yeah. Did we talk yesterday about the way? Okay. He paints. You said that he makes things look equal. People look equal, like the people in the back, the people in the front. And that also is problematic, we can say, because
No, I mean, Velázquez lived in a very hierarchical society in the court, in his golden cage of the court, and yet his painting goes against that. But to say goes against it is too strong. It simply means that he sees, he tends to see people like, for example, let's think of the spinners, where we have ordinary women who are working the thread, whatever they, working with the thread for tapestries in front, and then we have a goddess and the young girl, Minerva and Arachne, in back. And in fact, he's as interested in the ordinary women as he is in Minerva and Arachne. So there's no hierarchy of people there, and he tends to, like the queen and the king, supposed to be reflected in a mirror, but just there to be there on the back wall of Meninas. And he has brought them down to the size, I mean, smaller than anybody else in the picture. So he doesn't respect, of course, in one way he does, but he simply doesn't respect hierarchy in that way.
Tell me a little bit about the San Carlos and the writing school, because we have mentioned that, but we haven't stopped in that painting enough to.
Well, San Carlos and the writing school is, I think I said, it's a kind of working piece before Las Meninas, because it does the same thing. It has a child of the royal couple, in that case Balthazar Carlos, in the foreground, like little Margarita, and then it has the king and queen on a balcony in the background, very small. So he's already done that before. And so, again, it's kind of not, it's disproportionate. It's not respecting, I do think, perhaps once I said makes people equal, but it really is that he does not necessarily engage, he doesn't respect importance by size in his pictures. He can make very important people very small. Now, you might say, when you look at the writing school with Balthazar Carlos and the king and queen in back, you might say the fact is you recognize the king by his collar, by his chin, that Habsburg chin, you recognize him. So he's recognizable no matter what size he is. So there's no way, and it makes him even better, I mean, even greater. You're still a king even when you're just sort of an inch high. So there's no question that Velázquez is not, this is painting, you see. It's not thinking. He's not saying, well, really, the king is only worth an inch. He's saying he's king, but let's do it that way. So that's getting into the painting of it. That's really, like the soldiers. There are soldiers crowded around the two generals in the surrender of Breda, but then there are the little soldiers who appear just beyond or on the surface next to their arms, and they're just as high like the king in the back of either Las Meninas or the writing school. And that's kind of playing. It's playing with the possibilities of painting. In a way, it's beyond thinking. He's just letting the painting take over.
You know that they are saying that maybe the writing school is not from Velázquez?
I don't believe that for a minute. That is Velázquez. They say anything. There's so many paintings that aren't by Velázquez that are called Velázquez. To me, there's no question that's by Velázquez, that painting, the writing school. In that case, you see, there are many paintings that are called Velázquez, which sort of creep up there. But this is an invention that nobody else, I think, could do. Nobody. And Matho, interestingly enough, his son-in-law, painter, who copied those Rubens school pieces that are hanging there in back of the Las Meninas, he was a specialist in small figures. I mean, he was known for that. And it's an interesting relationship for Velázquez, because we don't think of small figures in Velázquez, but actually Matho could have learnt his small figures from his father-in-law. Maybe he learned them from his father-in-law. And then we have an interesting relationship, a guy who was a much sort of workaholic at the court. And what is his relationship to his great-great-father-in-law when he's painting his little figures? Well, clearly he's taking off in a way. It's a kind of, from our point of view, it's a kind of tribute to Velázquez. He wasn't doing this tribute, he was just doing it as work at court. So I think that maybe that Westminster has been called because there are little figures, Matho, but it's ridiculous. Velázquez did little figures all the time. He did little figures way back in Seville before he'd even gotten to court.
What do you think about the family, the painting of Del Mazo, the family painting? You know, where there's this group and
it's not a very good painting. I mean, it might be interesting about the relationships in the Velázquez family, but it doesn't interest me.
It doesn't interest you how it it's
an
related to
incompetent-
Las Meninas in
Oh,
terms.
it's an incompetent painting. I mean, the man in the back who's the painter. It's a terrible painting. It's in Vienna, I think. I can't remember where it is. A terrible painting. Just a terrible painting. It's interesting because he's of the family, so he's painting the family. But I mean, Matho didn't show any sign that he could really think as a painter, so why would it interest us particularly? I mean, of course, to have an image of the family of which he was part is naturally interesting.
Well, the fact that he was influenced by his master and.
Well, I just said he paints small pictures, but that painter in the background, which is certainly related to in the background of the Matho painting of the Velázquez family, there is a little painter way back painting. And surely that has something to do with Velázquez, but I would say who cares? I mean, it doesn't show us anything about Velázquez, it just shows us that a much weaker painter could take up something in the Velázquez manner. Let's put it that way. But he was specialized. He specialized. Matho did specialize. That view of Zaragoza, he specialized in small figures. So that was what he maybe took from. I mean, the question is, did he take it? But it's not that he gave it to Velázquez, because Velázquez did small figures back in Christ in the House of Martha and Mary in Seville. So he already did small figures way back then. It was something actually, those small figures probably come out of a tradition of printmaking, to be honest, and I've written about that there were many northern prints circulated all over Europe, made in Flanders, which Velázquez certainly knew, and printmakers who were working on a piece of paper on a flat surface often had windows with some other little figures in back of the big figures in front. So it's very likely that format, if we call it a format, is something that Velázquez learned from them, and that early picture is related to prints, not to paintings, but to prints. Titian painted small figures, but they're completely different than Velázquez's small figures because they actually inhabit where they are. They're in a landscape. In the back of the Bacchanal of the Andreans is a little figure on the hill, actually completely different, much less. They're just like little versions of big figures which are in another space, while Velázquez's little figures are more problematic. You can't quite figure out where they are, and that's partly because of his peculiar sense, individual, singular, let's use that word, singular sense of the picture surface.
Svetlana, what do you think about Goya's portrait of Charles IV and his family, where he is inside the painting?
Yeah, well, that's Velázquez, of course. I mean, he's learned that from Velázquez. I mean, the curious thing about Goya is his relationship which was very close to royalty, and in a sense, it's a scandalous picture because the people in the picture don't look particularly wonderful. So the interesting thing about, that picture, of course, is a takeoff on Velázquez. And after Velázquez in Spain, the painter who mattered to painters in Spain was Rubens, not Velázquez. Rubens won in that way. And Goya was the one who actually saw what a great painter he was. I mean, he's the one who picks up, and that's a good deal later, but he does pick up. And he's the one, for him, I think Rembrandt and Velázquez were the two artists he cared about most. Goya, I think he even said that, or we know that from his work. And certainly he did learn, even in paint handling, he learned from Velázquez. There are paintings by Goya which show that he appreciated, and it's nice to have another artist notice what you notice about an artist. This talks about who comments best on artists. Well, obviously the best commentator are artists. And Goya saw how Velázquez painted, and he took it up and used it, not in that painting, but in other paintings. He used the brushstrokes. He just saw what was going on, but he had a good eye.
So, but anyway, in that portrait, he presents the family, the group, and then he places himself with the canvas, hidden canvas, he's painted.
Right.
So, but why doesn't work like Las Meninas? Why doesn't work like a northern painting? Something that it was before we got there.
I can't answer that.
It's just.
I'm not going to try. I mean, you know.
It just
It's a
doesn't.
completely different painting. I mean, Goya's, what reminds us of Velázquez in the Goya painting is the fact that the painter is in there with, I think that's not the, I think he put himself in paintings other times too, Goya. It's not the only time he did it. And obviously he learned that. But his notion of a painting has nothing to do. I mean, let's say he didn't share what it demonstrates, if you want to put it that way, is a negative thing, that Goya didn't share a notion of a picture, of what a picture is, with Velázquez at all. He just didn't.
He didn't understand.
He wasn't interested. I mean, you know. I mean, in a way, Manet shares his notion. Manet was more interested in his notion of a picture than Goya was. It just didn't interest Goya that much. If we think of great Goya paintings, they don't look, the revolutionary paintings, they don't look like Velázquez. He moves in a quite different direction as a painter.
Let's talk about Manet. And the painting that historians and
Pablo
writers.
de Valladolid, is that what you're going to say? What are you going to say? Go on.
Yeah, the folies.
No, I mean Pablo. No, the one he really remarked on was the disappearance of the background in Pablo of Valladolid. That's the court jester, and that's the one he commented on. He also, I think, commented on Las Meninas, but I think you suggested at one point that in Bar of Fali, that the mirror in back of this woman at the bar in the Bar of Fali is supposed to be like Velázquez, but I can't see what that has to do with Velázquez at all. I mean, what? Which mirror? The mirror with the king and the queen are certainly have nothing to do with that. So I can't see. I mean, what you could compare is paint, and certainly Manet admired beyond anything the way in which Velázquez had space and paint, because Pablo de Valladolid is a figure standing against in a gray surrounding. There's a floor and a wall, and there's no marking, I think, in the Velázquez painting between the floor and the wall, so it's just kind of gray. And he thought that was magic, the kind of magic presence of that figure. Well, Velázquez figures do have magic presence, right? And he's got that, but the Pablo is a rather unusual. I mean, there are several pictures, wonderful pictures of dwarfs and other such figures, secondary people at court, and ancillary people at court, and he does make them wonderfully present. And that presence was something that Manet adored. Manet had great difficulty, clearly, with representing space. I mean, he couldn't have painted Meninas in a million years. And he chopped paintings up and put them back together, and he took advantage of the fact that he couldn't paint it by essentially painting things that look very flat in a different way than Velázquez looking very flat, because he really couldn't produce space, Manet. So he took advantage of it and became really a painter of using paint in a way that is certainly related to. He went to Spain, after all, related to what Velázquez did.
But when they talk about the Folies Bergère painting, they actually talk about the space. There is a mirror, there is a woman.
I don't think it has any. I don't know what does that have to do with. That's Margarita and the king and queen in back. That's ridiculous.
No, they're talking more about in terms of Foucault.
No.
Representation, the space that you are outside and you're related to the.
No, that's just that. If you want to compare the Bar of Forlì to Velázquez, it seems to me that's built on a house of verbal cards. It's just an invention. It's ridiculous. Of course, Manet, we know that Velázquez was the most important previous painter for him, but that picture has nothing in that way to do. And if we put Foucault in, of course, Foucault also wrote about Manet. That's a not very good text. It's now been published. I think I'm right, he wrote a book on Manet, and that is not very good. But this is just words, 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 words. It's getting back to like texts, right? Foucault is a text man, basically. It's just more text. It doesn't help us look at the Barafali.
But I'm interested in the fact that these are artists, like Goya, Manet.
Yeah, there are other little paintings that Manet did that are much closer to Las Meninas. I mean, I'm not going to, we can't see them, we're not going to talk about them now, than the Barafali. I mean, obviously, Las Meninas made a huge impression on him. And so you could find little touches and little things, but the Barafali, I can't see that. I mean, now that we're thinking about it, those little feet that stick in at the top, you know, we could say that's like, but about space, I can't see that it has anything to do. And if that's Foucault, again, I say take your Foucault cautiously.
The inspiration of Las Meninas to other artists, is there any that comes to you that you found interesting? Any piece that you can... No.
No, it's, I mean, I haven't thought about his, I don't like the word influence because it's a...
Or inspiration.
It's a bad word. It would be after Goya, it would be the 19th century, and curiously, now that I think about it, I mean, no artist has a bad word to say about Velázquez. I mean, he is the most universally admired painter in the Western European tradition that I can think of. I mean, nobody would say anything. It's quite remarkable to me. I mean, everybody, I mean, American painters went over there. They liked him when they were just learning how to paint at the beginning in the 19th century. They adored him. Everybody adores him. But have people learned from him? That isn't so clear. That isn't so clear. Maybe maybe you can't. I mean, maybe it's just, it's unique in a way. It just stands alone. You can't. In a way, it's very, very difficult to take from him. It's I mean, Manet did, in terms of just painting, did extremely well. And he did, after all, individual portraits which stand in a kind of space a little like Pablo. He did things like that. He did take up the stance of a Velázquez in a way. I mean, the portrait stance he took up.
It's true that nobody criticized Velázquez.
Pardon me?
It's true that nobody criticized him.
Never. It's absolutely extraordinary. Yep. And of course, what's very funny is that when these really not very good pictures get called Velázquez, then you'd have reason to criticize. I'm making a joke, but I mean, in fact, if we really include as his paintings some of the bad paintings that today are called Velázquez, then we'd have reason to criticize him. Then we'd say, well, that's not very good. But we don't, but it's an interesting case, you know, that's often the argument made by people about attribution. Well, painters have a day off. In other words, painters can have a day when they really don't paint as well as they paint the other days, right? But it doesn't seem to have been the case. Of course, he painted very, very few paintings compared to Rembrandt or Rubens. Rubens had a studio. He painted very few paintings. I mean, he was doing a lot of other things. He wasn't painting all the time, at all. So he painted very few paintings, and he never really painted except for portrait. He never painted the same thing twice. I mean, all of his really painters, the water cellar, I mean, we just can go through them. They're all quite unique. He didn't just do it over.
He never made a weak painting.
Well, no. I mean, except that's the problem with with attributions. We don't know what a weak Velázquez, we don't know what a weak Velázquez would be. We just say, I say it's not by Velázquez. Well, maybe he did paint a weak Velázquez, you see. That's the interesting question. I mean, maybe that's one of the reasons these attributions are so hard to accept, because we don't know. We certainly know weak Rembrandts. They're wrong, but we do know weak Rembrandts. We certainly know weak Rubens.
So maybe we created a fiction, the perfect Velázquez, and then...
That's right. Yep. But he largely lives up to the fiction, I would say. That would be my view.
Interesting.
No, he's an extraordinary painter, just an extraordinary painter. There are some bad ones. Some of those, is it in St. Petersburg? There are some early, the weakest paintings really are some of the Seville ones, and there are problems there. 3 guys sitting at a table, I don't know whether they're drinking or playing cards or something, and those aren't, I don't think, very good, and they might in fact be Velázquez. So there are some, it would be in the Sevillian time, before he came up to the court, that you would find paintings that had weakness.
But because of his learning.
Yeah, but he started pretty quickly. I mean, he was young, you know, he's born in 1599, and in the teens, he's the Water Cellar, damn good picture, and he's yet very young. But he had good teaching. Pacheco was no slouch. I mean, he had good examples of Spanish painting down there in Seville. They were good painters, not bad.
But that's a